The axis of evil. It is widely recognized that the presence of malicious forces in the world is of significant concern. This issue is not new. However, with the advancement of technology and the widespread use of social media, the potential to cause harm or destruction has reached alarming levels. The understanding of what constitutes evil varies among individuals, and even from culture to culture. Some define it as the opposite or absence of good, but most definitions agree that evil involves a lack of moral values, the violation of people's dignity, and harm to others. In his 2002 State of the Union address, George W. Bush coined the term axis of evil. The term was used to describe countries that, according to the United States, were not only engaged in, but also sponsoring terrorism and harboring terrorists. The then president was clear when he said that the countries that formed his axis of evil were Iraq, Iran, and North Korea. 3 countries that, according to the USA and its allies, were the main culprits for most of the evils in this world. It is worth noting that on that list, other countries were not included. The reason being that at the time, some countries that nowadays would be considered evildoers were on good terms with the US government. Or at least they were on speaking terms, and others were their allies at the time. In his speech, President Bush failed to acknowledge that evil extends beyond just nuclear weapons, human rights abuses, and terrorism, something the axis of evil countries are accused of. Notably, the US and its allies have accused these 3 countries of actions they themselves have undertaken. Another significant issue is the perception that Western nations are civilized societies, while other regions are viewed differently, thus making the USA believe that they are the moral leaders of the world. After the terrorist attack on the Twin Towers on September 11, 2001, the famous War on Terror was launched, spearheaded by the United States with the support of various nations, amongst them the United Kingdom, then led by Tony Blair. The intention was to destroy the weapons of mass destruction supposedly hidden in Iraq and ready to be used by Saddam Hussein. However, in spite of the lack of evidence and the experts' conclusion that there were no WMDs in Iraq, the coalition went ahead and left the country and its society in ruins, ironically, giving rise to numerous terrorist groups. After the failure of finding WMDs, the United States and its allies continued their program by supporting and encouraging some Arab and Eastern European countries to dethrone their leaders. Their hope was to introduce a democratic regime. However, what they left behind was a trail of destruction and a region in turmoil. Sadly, what the USA government and its allies did in the Middle East was just another act of their failed foreign policy, a policy that has caused so much destruction and pain in many parts of the world. The world is divided by 2 ideologies vying for power. On one side, the United States is backed by the United Kingdom, Israel, and Saudi Arabia. On the other side, Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea stand together with some smaller allies. The issue is that these countries are unwilling to accept their moral responsibilities in their search for power. The tirade of insults and accusations we hear on a daily basis by the opposite blocs I have just mentioned is a reminder of what is at stake in the world. Sadly, peace and prosperity is not what they are interested in. What they want to achieve is power and global domination. On one side, Russia dreams of past glories, and Putin's goal is to re-establish once more what the Soviet Union used to be. Hence the war in Ukraine and the threat to other former Soviet Union nations, not forgetting the treatment any opposition in the country receives. Iran and North Korea want a slice of nuclear domination, and the treatment of their citizens is nothing short of appalling. As for China, most people know how the Chinese government ruled the country with strict policies, harassing, torturing, and having anyone who dares to question the official party under surveillance. Not to mention the conflict China have with Taiwan and Tibet concerning territorial boundaries. While the Western propaganda machinery has somehow managed to make people believe that the others are evil and responsible for almost every problem in the world, they present themselves as civilized and the bearers of human values. They justify every evil they do, either by proclaiming that God is on their side or by blaming others for making them act in such a way. However, reality says otherwise. Although Russia and their allies are responsible for a lot of the problems in the world, the United States and their puppets are anything but blameless. Let's take the example of the United States, perhaps one of the biggest culprits in the world, alongside Russia. Through the years, the United States boasted to the world that their moral values, their freedom, and their care and friendship towards other nations were an example to follow. Fortunately, we have come to realize that all that propaganda was nothing other than a charade and a way of taking advantage of others. One only has to investigate a little to observe how the US government acts in world affairs and how misleading their words and actions are. Through history, they have invaded nations, supported and imposed dictators in various parts of the world, provided weapons to rebel groups and to countries in order to achieve their own agenda. And in the process, they left a trail of destruction and death. There is an abundance of examples of how the United States and its allies, especially the United Kingdom, have caused more problems and destruction than solutions in the world. Countries like Libya, Iraq, Syria, El Salvador, Chile, Panama, Afghanistan, and Vietnam, amongst others, are clear examples of the mess left behind by the United States, with the support of others. It is important to mention that in some of those countries, Russia and the United States were directly engaged in a long conflict that, at the end of the day, only left misery and destruction for the people, without achieving anything. According to some sources, the United States have been involved directly or indirectly in the replacing of many foreign governments as far back as the 19th century. But the question is, why did they do that? Personally, I don't believe they did, and continue to do that out of kindness. But judging by the results of their actions, it is more likely that their intentions are to influence certain countries in order to have control over certain geographical areas. However, the big problem here is that by replacing or helping others to replace a regime, they leave behind misery and broken societies that in many cases are almost impossible to rebuild. Moreover, they use democracy and freedom to masquerade their intentions. Very often, the superpowers of this world don't need to directly engage themselves in certain conflicts when they have an agenda to fulfill. What they do instead is give financial and military support to other regimes to do the dirty work for them. The assistance China and Russia give to regimes in countries like Venezuela, Cuba, Nicaragua, Iran, and up to recently Syria is well known. On the other hand, the United States is also engaged in similar tactics, supporting or maintaining friendly relations with regimes like the ones in Saudi Arabia, Argentina, and above all, with the Zionist government of Israel, whose aim is to possess Palestinian land at all costs and by any means, in order to broaden the Zionist state. Moreover, it is important to mention the influence the US government has on many right-wing politicians around the world. Unfortunately, it seems that the powerful countries of this world believe, or they have made themselves believe, that they own the right to establish order in the world, not for the good of people, but with the intention of fulfilling their ambitions and their dreams of world dominance. It is amazing and frustrating to see how they can discuss other nations' futures as if they were the masters of the universe. The most recent examples of this type of practice are Ukraine and Palestine, two nations whose people are being displaced because of indiscriminate attacks from those whose only solution to fulfill their dreams of greatness is to completely eradicate people, or to make them surrender the land they call home. It is a cause for concern to see how the United States and Israel, led by their evil leaders, can discuss the fate of the Palestinian people as if they were objects and not human beings. Similar to this is Russia's attitude towards Ukraine. Apparently, Russia is ready to discuss Ukraine's fate with the United States without even listening to what the Ukrainian people have to say. It is pathetic to see how the leaders of the military superpowers can discuss other people's futures as if they were a bunch of vulgar thieves sharing the bounty. Unfortunately, when the superpowers interfere in other nations' affairs, it is not done with the best intentions, but with the mentality of getting hold of those countries' assets and natural resources for their own benefit. Final word. The United States Secretary of State Marco Rubio said in an interview that Venezuela and Cuba were the enemies of humanity. That statement was a bit too rich, coming from a Secretary of State of a country that, directly or indirectly, has killed and displaced far more people than the brutal regimes of Cuba and Venezuela. There is no doubt that the world is at a crossroads. The countries that form the axes of evil have shown that they want more power and world dominance. They are doing it by threatening and enabling their allies to bully and harass other nations, using the fight against terrorism as an excuse. In the process, they forget that they are a part of the terror they claim to be fighting. It is frightening to see that while the crooks of this world go ahead with their ambitious plans, The rest of the world seems to remain passive, hoping that someone else will raise their voice to denounce what is going on around them. The dependency on those superpowers has left many countries in the world defenseless and ready to bow down to any demand imposed on them. Evil in this world has two faces, and it is being led by the superpowers who will use any means to fulfill their ambitions, even if that means getting rid of entire societies. Sadly, we have come to a point in life where manipulation, blackmail, and the distortion of freedom and democracy are being used to intimidate others. Perhaps this trend will never end, but there will always be ways of fighting back for a better society.